We're going to be discussing new tools for growing, packing, and processing berries in British Columbia. And while this is focused on British Columbia as kind of where we're going to be talking about spotted winged Drosophila and some of the other things, these pests are throughout berry crops. And the principles that I'm going to talk about are relevant whether you're in Eastern Canada or Western Canada. Oh, I'm not sure if I can. Oh, I can. That's wonderful. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is spotted winged Drosophila. That's what everybody is most interested in, and that is, of course, a very economically significant pest in the Pacific Northwest, Western Canada, and across to Eastern Canada, as well as in Michigan, Georgia, California, Washington, Oregon. I'm also going to be discussing some disease control strategies and some weed management strategies. And I'll introduce or reintroduce, I should say, a couple of BioSafe products that have been registered. They've been registered for about 3 years now, and they will definitely help with spotted winged Drosophila, with disease, with weed management, and most importantly, pest resistance. And this talk is going to be divided into two portions. And the next portion is, thank you, is processing and packing berries. And this is simply to increase shelf life. And Mike Larose is going to be speaking on this subject. And he's very, very well educated as far as cleaning and packing and processing. So we're glad to have him here. He's going to tell you how to implement a master cleaning schedule. And he's going to show you some new equipment and some new ideas that will hopefully have a positive impact on your business. So getting started, we are going to talk about spotted winged Drosophila management in berry crops. And again, this is for all small and stone fruits. So SWD, which you will hear me calling this because spotted winged Drosophila is very long to say. So again, this could be a raspberry, this could be a blueberry, this could be a strawberry, a peach. And when we talk about what can happen, you can have 100% potential crop loss from this pest, especially later in the season when things begin ripening. And you'll notice when you start packing that the packaging, and when you are packing things, you'll have a lot of juice, extra juice. So that's kind of the only indication sometimes that you have an infestation and your fruit is infested, which is unfortunate. So we are going to discuss first the spotted winged Drosophila life cycle. It's very, very fast and temperature dependent, of course, but at about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Celsius, it only takes about 8 to 10 days for one generation. It's very significant because that means that there can be up to 13 generations in one season. And that, of course, is a recipe for a lot of potential resistance. And this is what it looks like when SWD lays its eggs. The female has a saw-like ovipositor, and she digs into the fruit to lay her eggs right underneath the skin or on top. And again, sometimes you don't realize there's an infestation until it's much too late. And this is what your fruit ends up looking like. And again, later in the harvest, everything could be fine and quickly turn to disaster. So this particular pest takes a lot of close integrated pest management and inspection and attention. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have spotted winged Drosophila on your farm. That, of course, is the first question. There are a lot of lookalikes. So trapping is very, very important. And not just the adults, but trapping the larvae as well. And so there are a lot of different baits out on the market and attractants. So you can purchase those. You can also do homemade with apple cider vinegar or other fermenting products. And then as far as the salt or sugar water test, again, this is just to see how many larvae are in your fruit. And this is especially helpful when you are in the middle of your IPM program, whether it's all cultural or it's spray. You have to know if it's working. So you very gently sort of massage the berries and you put them in the water, and then all the larvae float to the top. Don't do it before lunch. That's my biggest suggestion. So in order to really successfully trap spotted winged Drosophila, you have to think like the critter, and they like it to be shady with moderate temperatures, high humidity. So you really want to place your traps in a shady area, and it will depend on the crop you're growing. If you're growing caneberries, such as blueberries or raspberries, you're going to have it about 3 to 5 feet up in your crop. If it's strawberries, it'll either be on the ground or it'll be slightly above your crop. So pay attention, because this is going to affect how many SWDs you trap. You may think that, oh, I'm looking good, I don't have any adults, I haven't trapped any. It could be that you don't have enough traps or they're not in the right spot. So to be successful, you really want a minimum of 2 traps per crop, and 1 in the interior and 1 at the field edge. That's what scientists recommend, and it's been very well documented that this is a good strategic location rule. Now, after you detect just 1 spotted winged Drosophila, you can sort of take that down to 1 trap and put it into your canopy, but make sure you're doing this before your fruit begins to ripen. Otherwise, they're not going to work as well. So how do you identify what you trap? There is actually a really handy website. I can get this to pull up here. There we go. Smallfruits.org. And that is going to have pictures of what everything looks like, what you're looking for. And as far as tools, a 30x looper or magnification is really, that's the best. Lit is even better, and a dissecting scope is even better than that. But be sure to check that website if you are looking for identification features. Our threshold, 1. That's it. Just 1 fly. As soon as you see 1 fly, we start spraying. Now, before we get into spraying, because there are organic growers who can't spray, and the sprays by themselves do not work 100%. Especially with a pest like this. This is a very tenacious little beast, and it's hard to control. You need multiple practices. And so these are listed. These have all been thoroughly researched and documented and are proven to work to help reduce infestation. So varietal susceptibility, of course, is one thing you can do. And the recommendation is to pick varieties that are going to ripen before your SWD numbers start to really surge and take off. And we have some good recommendations here from Dr. Hansen at Michigan State University. And there we go, thank you. Field sanitation for SWD is probably the most important cultural practice that you can adopt. And what this means is removing all the overripe hanging fruit, anything that's fallen on the ground, every single day. You have to be dedicated to this in order for it to work. So once you have all this revolting material that spotted winged Drosophila would love, and there's probably thousands of flies in that material. You can put it in a plastic bag and put it out in the sun, tie it really, really tight, and solarize them, fry them. You can also dig 2 feet and bury them. But again, that is a huge source of inoculum for this particular pest. I don't know who's, Emily, are you the one who's actually changing the slides?
I am.
Oh, you're doing great. Thank you. All right, another good strategy for control is ground cover management. And because these guys like it to be really humid and a moderate temperature, the hotter and drier and more hellish that you can make your rows in between, the less spotted wing Drosophila infestation you will have. So according to the latest research, the black weed mat is the best. And weed control. This kind of goes with the weed barrier, but there are a lot of wild hosts for spotted wing Drosophila. And this is a nice chart, and this is from Oregon State University. And all of this information is online, and you are welcome to it. And I would actually urge you to educate yourself as much as possible on the pest and these various cultural strategies. So this brings me to one tool that is new-ish for Canada, and that's Axe, which is our broad spectrum burn down herbicide. So this is an ammonium nanoate. It's a 40% active ingredient. And sometimes people will refer to this as a pelargonic acid or a fatty acid or a salt or a soap. Its basic function is to penetrate the cell membrane and explode it. So there is no mode of action to sort of have any resistance to. And a very exciting development happened last summer. We got Axe labeled to use around food crops in Canada. This is a big deal. Now, this is not an OMRI certified product yet. And I say that because pelargonic acid is not recognized as a biorational product yet, but that does not mean that it won't be recognized in the future. In the meantime, you can spray this in berries, in orchards, all of those sites. And if you are interested in organic certification or you're growing organically, you can talk with your auditor and get specific, a specific approval for that. Axe, because it is a burn down and it does not translocate to the roots, this is a very, very safe product to use around environmental impact areas like irrigation ditches. You can use it right up to the side, or you can use it in dry ditches. And this particular product works the best in the following conditions. Coverage. You have to get good coverage. If you tell me Axe doesn't work, I'm going to tell you, you didn't put enough on. It works. Trust me. This is a great little video demonstrating how fast it works. And one other piece of the puzzle with Axe is really to, hang on, I think I can do it. If you kind of hover over this, Emily, there might be a little, oh, there's not.
It was working earlier, but if you give me a moment.
Well, this was a video showing Axe working in about 4 hours. I think the temperature was in the low 70s. It's sunny. Obviously, in those conditions, it's going to work the fastest. And I would recommend that you use this, if you're going to use it as a standalone, use it early in the season when your weeds are less than 2 inches. And then if you spray it on a day with nice sunshine, you can get away with using a 6% rate. But if you don't have sunshine, then you're going to need to really pay attention to your coverage and be a little more patient, because it doesn't work quite as fast, although it is not temperature dependent. The other thing we have a lot of success with in the States using Axe for is resistant weeds. We have a heck of a problem with Russian knapweed, and most of the herbicides that we're being used by DOT and others for veg management are no longer working very well. They'll get maybe 50, 60, 70% control. So when you add Axe as a tank mix, not only is it very, very economical, but It will kill resistant weeds, even when you're tank mixing at a 0.5% in the summer or a 1% in the winter. It's still going to get the job done. The other part of this is many times when you're using glyphosate, you're kind of like drumming your fingers, waiting for it to hit 55 so that can actually be translocated into the plant, kill it. That can take 2 weeks. When you tank mix Axe with your glyphosate product or whatever other herbicide you're using, you get much faster results within a day while it still translocates down and kills the plant. The other really lovely thing about Axe, and this is a side effect, if you will, it does fry insects. If you have unwanted vegetation, weeds, say you have a horrible thistle problem and they're covered in, I don't know, mites, aphids, thrips, take your pick. If you spray those weeds with Axe, it's not only going to kill the green foliage, it's going to kill the insects. And not just by destroying their habitat, like many herbicides work, but by actually frying them. Oh, it's awesome. And okay, we had a little segue there. That's a new tool. I'm hoping you guys can take advantage of it this year, either as a standalone product or a tank mix, and use it. It's a wonderful tool, especially now that we can use it in food crops. Pruning is very important with this particular pest. And this again is from Oregon State University. It shows the highest concentration of egg laying and larvae activity in the middle of the canopy. And the reason is these little beasts like very moderate temperatures and a lot of humidity. So when you prune, you're creating more airflow and you're disturbing their environment. Exclusion. This is a physical method of keeping them out, and it works very well. It takes forethought and planning. It takes labor, time, and money, because you have to buy everything to actually exclude them. And then early harvest. We kind of touched on this before with some specific varieties. And this is just beating the SWD to the punch and harvesting your berries maybe slightly early. And then this was a really interesting one to me, the mass trapping. It seemed ridiculous, but it actually works. But instead of 1 or 2 traps for the monitoring, you're using 40 traps per acre. And it's really just to collect the insects. And there's a lot of traps you can use, they call lure and bait or bait and kill, with attractants in it, whether it's an insecticide or another material. You can use those too and actually kill them while you're trapping. And then chilling your fruit as soon as it's harvested. In reading a couple different pieces of literature, some were documented only 3 days at these temperatures and the larvae and eggs would die. I'm going to say 8 days because I'm more conservative. And that was also in the literature. So this is, if you have the capability, this works. Okay, so we're going to touch on chemical control strategies for SWD. And the question here is when to start spraying. And a little fun fact about spotted wing Drosophila, this particular vinegar fly will lay its eggs in unripe fruit. That's very important when you consider what you're spraying and when you're spraying. And you can fine tune it quite a bit when you trap. So if you are trapping and you're checking weekly, you start your sprays as soon as you detect one fly. And then from that point on, you do a weekly salt test with your IPM program, with your spray program. And this is going to tell you whether it's working or not. So if you're not trapping, you can't trap, you can't identify, you are going to start spraying as soon as that fruit starts to ripen. And then the most important thing for both management strategies, you spray until harvest. There's no letting up. And so when you are spraying, Now we can move on to, well, what are we going to spray? And you have several really nice products available to you. And a lot of these have good efficacy, moderate efficacy, but the real fear is that we will develop resistance. And so we have to work on using our chemicals that we have registered carefully, and other strategies that I will get to for managing resistance, because it is happening, which we'll get to. So to just summarize, you want to use bait traps and you want to check them weekly. Once you start to once you find one fly or the berries start to ripen, that's when you start to spray, and you spray till harvest. In the beginning of the season, it's advisable to be using your harsher products, your harsher insecticides with longer residual. And then closer to harvest, you can start using some of your reduced risk products that may, they have a low or no post-harvest interval. So that's kind of a good strategy to keep in mind too. And then of course, really incorporating a salt test during your treatment to see how well it's working. Another tip, if your products aren't working well or you're not getting the control, you may need to increase the frequency of your applications. And this is where Oxidate 2.0 comes in. And I know you're wondering, well, it's not an insecticide. What's its point? Oxidate is a very, very good contact bactericide, fungicide, and in some circumstances, viricide. And it works through oxidation. It's 27% hydrogen peroxide and it's 2.5% peracetic acid. And this is not industrial grade anything. We manufacture our products ourselves. We manufacture the peracetic acid ourselves, and we use a 75% EPA grade hydrogen peroxide on a sterile filling line with RO water and a very, very stringent deionization process to make sure that the oxidate is clean and it's safe. And it is. It's a beautiful product. I've used it many, many years in my own career. So how is this going to help us with an insect? It sort of, well, okay, let me start over. Oxidate works in some important ways. It's not necessarily the main ways it works, which is exploding things, but it will get rid of all the bacteria, all the yeast, all the mold, sugar, all the junk on any leaf surface or plant part that you sprayed this on. So it's very much like a sanitation product for your plants. And with that comes an instant kill, instant. There's no waiting for anything to happen or be triggered. When it lands, it kills. And it has the ability and the power, because of that peracetic acid, to actually kill dormant spores. That's the most important thing it does. It kills dormant spores. Very thick cell walls. Nothing conventional will get those very, very tenacious dormant spores. And we use this quite a bit with resistance management. And the reason is, when you're spraying something like, say, Entrust or Delegate, which is kind of the same thing, it has a very specific mode of action. And it's going to take a while to actually start working. So when you're using Oxidate, we're going to kind of skip through this program a little bit until we get to the part with Oxidate. So Emily, if you just want to kind of go through the whole thing, there it is. So when we add Oxidate to things like insecticide sprays, fungicide sprays, we're getting that instant kill. We're killing dormant spores, and anything that's resistant it's dead. And what we found quite recently in several documented studies, and I'll kind of take you through these, is that applying Oxidate either before your insecticide sprays or tank mixed with it is actually doing a couple different things. The first thing is it's cleaning off all of the food for the adults. They eat yeast. We kill yeast. We kill all yeast. They have nothing to eat. How sad. The other thing we do is it actually will burn off the breathing tubes that those revolting little larvae poke up through the berry. And so if we, let's see, I think the next slide is the actual, yeah, there's the little breathing tubes. Aren't they cute? And so this was sort of anecdotal several years back. We did one study with Cornell University, and they found the 56% reduction in egg and larval presence in berries that were treated with oxidate. And so again, oxidate is helping out in a couple different ways. It's not killing the insect. It's not an insecticide. It's killing their food, and it's also suffocating their larvae. So we also have another study that was done recently, 2017, and this was a collaboration with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and ourselves. And what we found was that using oxidate in rotation with your conventional insecticides really increased the efficacy of not only your insecticides, but the oxidate spray itself made a difference. We can see that in the next slide. Not quite the next slide, but this is a good example. You know, I'm wondering if that, I had a graph. Try two more. No, I guess the graph got taken out. Okay, we'll keep, if you can go back. Thank you. Okay. So the graph basically showed that, and I have this study available if anybody would like to read it. It's really interesting. And what it showed was that once you spray that oxidate and then you continue on with your malathion or such, the malathion worked much better on the cleaned off fruit. And not only are we cleaning off all the yeast, sugar, mold, anything like that that could possibly injure and rot the fruit and feed a spotted winged Drosophila, but we are also preserving your storage life, your shelf life, without even having to do anything. So this is an example on the left. Those are untreated. They didn't get any oxidate throughout their production season. They have spotted winged Drosophila damage. And then on the right, these were treated weekly. And you can see they are in much better shape. All right, so the latest research. And this, I had the little, this was brought to us by the USDA. There it is, the Organic Agriculture Research and Extension Initiative, as well as USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview of what they're working on and what we have found in the year of 2020. Yeah, it was 2020. There wasn't a lot of field work that people were able to do because of the pandemic, but work was still done. There are some new bait, lure, and kill traps available on the market with some new attractants. And those have looked very promising. Gum, which is kind of what it sounds like, but it's the resin of a sweet gum. And they have been using this by itself as a trap. And what it does is it volatilizes and it produces this odor where the spotted winged Drosophila get all crazy and weird, and they don't want to lay their eggs in your crop. So there's many different ways of sort of putting your gum out. The one thing that I read about that seemed to work really well was a hemp fiber pad, and then you kind of spread the gum on it. So it's like bread on toast, and you sort of strategically place those within your crop. So they did a lot of work with gum this year, and they found that it does make a difference with and without pesticides. But this was under moderate to low pressure. It did not work as well under high pressure. They are developing, well, there is a parasitoid that is currently in quarantine in California and in Delaware, and that should be released in August 2021. I'm probably gonna butcher this. Ganaspis brasiliensis is the parasitoid wasp. Once they're released from quarantine, which is about a 2 to 3 year process, but they're finished up with it, they're going to distribute it to local insectaries where they can begin to generate these, and then they'll be available for release. We've also done some work with skin thickeners that have shown a lot of promise because the thicker the skin of your fruit, the less damage is possible. And then unfortunately, I did save the bad news for last, but there is resistance to spinosad in California, and there is a little bit in Oregon. There has been none detected in Canada, Georgia, Michigan, I believe, and I think Massachusetts. So it's not the end of the world, but again, we have to be very, very vigilant with our 13 generations per season. And on that, I'm going to finish up just by talking about a couple other ways to use oxidate if you're growing not only fruit, but vegetables, whatever you're growing. And it's using it as a pre-harvest spray. And this is a relatively inexpensive way to reduce spoilage, and it works very, very well. So it's a 1% rate that you would be using. You do it the day or the night before harvest. There's no rinse required. And it really increases the shelf life by removing the bacteria, yeast, and mold. Because spotted-wing Drosophila, when they do make that incision with the ovipositor, they're making a wound. And it's very possible for the berry to become rotten with botrytis or rhizopus just from that damage. So when we clean the fruit off, the chances of it spoiling are much less. And then another really interesting way to use it is for treating your agricultural water. There were some studies done recently showing how dirty our spray water is and our spray tank in general, and all the nasty things they find. Even if you're adding whatever fungicide, bactericide. I think the next slide shows a study. It doesn't, that's okay. I'll back up a minute. This is doing a post or pre-harvest spray on spinach, and it shows you the duration of the shelf life and how little bacteria actually is on that spinach, even 7 days after storage. And it's an easy application. Back to the agricultural spray water, they tried different coppers. Copper is really commonly used, and they did some tests using copper in spray tank water to see if it would get rid of either human health or plant health pathogens. And what they found was really sad and scary. Oxidate worked great on both human health and plant health pathogens, but most of our conventional coppers didn't touch it. Or if they did have an effect on one particular bacteria, they didn't have a very wide-reaching effect on anything else. So this is another area to use oxidate to increase your harvest yield and the quality. And then the last thing I want to talk about is using oxidate for disease control pre-harvest, because again, this is a new tool, a relatively new tool. And you can use this in a couple different ways, as we discussed. You can use this as a standalone, and you can use it as a tank mix. So in mummyberry, this is an important tool because, as you'll see from the next slide, it has a very tenacious life cycle. On the very bottom, in the winter, it overwinters in apothecia. Ooh, I might have butchered that, but these resting structures. And then when it starts to rain and the environment is right, they explode out and they start to infect the low-lying branches of your crop. And you'll see things like on the left-hand side there. And then from there, they infect your actual buds, flowers, so on and so forth, and then your fruit. So oxidate is an exceptionally good tool to use season round for this particular pathogen because it has so many different ways that it's helping eradicate, from the dormant spores that are being overwintered to a re-inoculation if it's blown by wind or rain, to establishing back on the ground. So if you are consistently using oxidate, and the nice thing is you can use oxidate with all of the conventional recommendations. And I took this from the Ministry of Ag. I think it's the next slide. No, it's not. Well, this is a nice picture, kind of shows you this is when you need to really start spraying, when you've got about 5 millimeters of green tissue showing and the bud scales are exposed. Okay, so this is what you can use. You have a lot of tools for managing mummyberry. So any of these can be tank mixed with oxidate. And you'll use a so 0.3% solution. 1 liter for every 300 liters. And what that costs per 1,000 liters is about anywhere from 33 to 46 US dollars per 1,000 liters just to add oxidate to your spray. You don't have to change anything. You just add it. And again, this is what it does. You kill dormant structures and you get a broad kill of everything else, including anything resistant that managed to escape and slip behind. So whether it's the disease itself or it's a resistant bacteria, who knows, we will get it. And then of course, botrytis, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. We work wonders with botrytis, either as a standalone at a 1%, or as a tank mix with, I think the next slide has the tools. Oh, no, it doesn't. That's right. I didn't write them in, but it is tank mixable with most of the conventional synthetic and a few of the biopesticides out there. We have that information at corporate that we're happy to share with you. And this is a beautiful study done showing pre-harvest sprays and botrytis incident in strawberries. And so we're sort of putting oxidate against a grower's standard of Topsin M, and we are right on the money with the conventional. So that's a great feeling. And again, this is something that you can use all of what you would normally use. You add oxidate in, you're going to keep that chemistry and these tools longer because we will be delaying resistance. Mike, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. So one of the topics, or the topic that I'm going to be covering today, is one of the big topics that's been in the news, in all of our trade journals. We're having to go to classes for it now, and it's food safety. So with the new FSMA rules, even though majority of us here, maybe blueberry growers, raspberry growers, small fruit growers, a lot of us are dry packing our fruit. And so some of the things that I'm going to be going over may not directly apply to how your operation may be operating on a post-harvest or packing house scale versus packing tomatoes or potatoes or cucumbers where it's a wet process. But there's a lot of those in attendance who may be growing blueberries and also growing other crops where you may have opportunities for treating your produce after harvest in the packing house. But I'll also be going over general sanitation practices. So for BioSafe's food safety program, we identify 5 areas of potential cross-contamination where BioSafe can directly help and provide solutions to inhibit that cross-contamination, to provide protection against human health pathogens as well as spoilage pathogens. So obviously it all starts on the growing, and then we move into harvesting. That's been a big focus lately. Packing, processing, and then in cold storage. Now, one of the other areas that's starting to gain a lot of attention and focus while they're trying to draft the rules for specific commodities when it comes to transportation, but transportation would be the other area where you have that last step of cross-contamination before it hits the retailer. And so our general sanitation program that I'll be going over here in a few minutes, that could also apply into the transportation area. So our general causes of post-harvest decay, So this doesn't necessarily apply to human health pathogens, but definitely impacts the shelf life and spoilage rates. So the areas where we need to pay the closest attention is harvesting. So that's why most of our berries are still at the fresh market. We still haven't been able to find a great mechanical way to harvest those berries quite yet without causing blemishes, bruising, or skin wounds, like it's listed there on the slide. Process guys, you can, there are mechanical ways to harvest the fruit, but if it's fresh, it's too much of a risk to cause blemishes or bruising or wounds on that fruit. And so that's why it's still handpicked. Food storage, that's the other area where molds, yeast, fungus can contaminate our fruit. Processing, another area, especially when they're getting treated in a wet environment. That's why it's critical to treat that water if they're being wet packed. Our packaging, and then and the marketing and then retailer side. Obviously, those are mostly out of our control, but those are the main areas where we tend to see post-harvest loss. You can go ahead and move on to the next one. So BioSafe, our specialty, as Sarah led into earlier in the presentation, is peroxyacetic acid. So whether it's in the field with oxidate or if it's in the packing house, being used as a sanitation tool or as a treatment on a critical control point in your packing process, PAA is is the chemistry we've found to be the most effective and the most versatile across whether you're packing fruit, vegetables, and we also do food safety and quality control products for meat, poultry, seafood. So PAA has become a very versatile tool when it comes to food safety and quality assurance practices. So listed, sorry, go back one real quick. So listed there are the 4 most common types of sanitizers or water treatment products. PAA, so ozone, you see, they all work off oxidation. That's its mode of action. PAA, I hate using the word second most powerful because with ozone, the machines are very expensive. You got to generate your ozone. And then once it's generated, it's very unstable. So for those of us, if we're wet packing, so like in these tomatoes, for example, those are coming in from the field. They've got dirt on them, molds, yeast, fungus. God forbid, there's coliforms on the surface of that fruit. As soon as that hits ozone, the ozone starts breaking apart. So it becomes rather ineffective for the type of treatments we're using it for. So next most powerful is PAA. And so that's why we have spent 20 years kind of perfecting the manufacturing of PAA and then the marketing and technical support when using it. Okay, now I can switch. So first step that goes into our packing house, and this includes on the farm. So even if you're not packing, if you're sending your berries to somebody else to pack and you're just growing, you still need to have, most of us should have a master cleaning schedule because this is going to be used for both your packing house and any in-field food safety sanitation practices. So things that you're going to be for master cleaning schedule, and these are things that BioSafe can directly help you establish if you don't have one put together already. But the most important things are who's doing it, what are they doing, how often, and why. And so the areas that we need to keep the closest attention to are our food contact surfaces. And that's any of our packing equipment, the floors and areas around that equipment, drains. The drains have become a very, very dangerous place for cross-contamination, especially for listeria, where biofilm helps contain that listeria in the drains. And even your walls and areas around that conveyor where splash up can, water can splash on the wall, splash back onto the fruit, and now you've just cross-contaminated. You want to keep a record of how often, so this is part of the master cleaning schedule, keep a record of how often you're sanitizing, and whether it's occurring daily, every other day. That's kind of determined by the grower. Next slide. So we kind of covered this here. One thing that is very nice, it's convenient, and it reduces the chance for cross-contamination, is that when PAA is used as a sanitizer, you let it hang on there and no rinse is needed. That's very, very important, because anytime, so after you put your sanitizer on, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to then rinse that off. It's another point of cross-contamination. So at the labeled rates that we have for our PAA products on our labels, either Sanidate 5 or Storax, there's no rinse required once you do this treatment. So you just spray it on and then let it air dry. And then for tools, scissors, clippers, pruning tools, those can just go into a dip station or a bucket that's got a solution made up. So when it comes to sanitizing and cleaning, and again, I mean, it's in the name, master cleaning schedule. It's not all about sanitizing. It's about cleaning too. So you can't sanitize without cleaning first. There's a big difference between disinfecting and then sanitizing. When you're disinfecting, you end up using a much higher rate of, let's say, Sanidate 5 or Storax or just PAA in general, but because they're assuming you're trying to do a cleaning and then disinfection step all in one, or disinfectant application all in one step. When you're sanitizing, you're applying a cleaner first, rinsing that off, and then applying your sanitizer immediately after. And so most people are going to be using an alkaline cleaner, especially if we're packing berries, because that's what's going to emulsify your sugars, greases, any oils that may be left behind, starches. That's what an alkaline cleaner is for. If you have bicarbonates, mineral deposits in your water, hard water, then that's when you'd use an acid cleaner. But most people end up using an alkaline cleaner. GC Pro Oxidizer is a granular form of hydrogen dioxide. So this is a product that BioSafe has been a major manufacturer for almost the full 20 years that we've been in business. And it started as being used for control of algae and irrigation water. And through our R&D efforts, we found that it's become a very excellent tool for laying down underneath your packing line, underneath areas where there's a lot of standing water left behind, in order to reduce slip hazards, not allow any algae or biofilm buildup, and then it also leaves a residual there so that it'll inhibit any bacteria, fungus, molds that may be forming there. You can also use either our cleaner or sanitizer as a foam application. Foam's great because it's visual. You can see where it's being applied. And then it also gets into all the nooks and crannies and the corners and the crevices in our equipment. Most of our equipment's made to be, is designed and engineered to be used in a food processing facility, and therefore it's made to be sanitized. So getting in nooks and crannies shouldn't be that big of an issue for us, but it's still, the foam is the visual tool alone, and then it allows that chemistry to actually achieve the proper contact time that the label is stating. Next slide. So these are these products are mostly for processing. So these are if you're doing IQF, freezing of berries, or if you're putting them in cups and sealing them for RTE type meals, this is where Sanidate FD would be the appropriate product. This is an FDA labeled product. So in processing, yeah, Sanidate FD is the appropriate. That's where the FD comes from. And then if it's just strictly packing, you're not doing any fresh cut or a slicing and dicing of anything, then our Sanidate 5 and Sanidate 12 or Storax in Canada would be the appropriate products. So just to kind of touch on the equipment real quick, the chemistries work great, but if you can't dispense them and apply them correctly, that you can get them put out correctly, then that inhibits the ability for them to be effective. So we have a number of different equipment options, including foamers, foggers. So you want to do a nightly sanitation step within your packing house. You can use one of the foggers, fog the room. Where it's most effective is in a cold storage. You can let the fogger run for half hour. It fogs the room, and it inhibits any yeasts or molds, or including any coliforms that may be present there, or yeast, molds, human health pathogens. But where this is most effective is inhibiting spoilage while in storage. And then we have things like the biomat for, in front of entryways. The dosatron is a very easy, simple method for injecting these products into a spray bar or to use to fill up your sanitation backpack sprayers. And then I'll touch on the prominent pumps and probes here in just a second. Next slide. So for those of you guys who are, let's say you are packing berries and you are using the wet process, this is, and if you have a conveyor line where you have a spray bar over the top, if you're doing berries, most likely it's a very low volume, almost mist spray that you're putting over the top of those berries. But if you're doing tomatoes or potatoes, it's probably going to look very similar to what you see in the picture there. What we've historically done is use the dosatron for these applications, and then taken a test strip to at once an hour, check the ppm, make sure it's at the appropriate rate. Within the last 2 years, BioSafe's invested a significant amount of resources and brought a lot of expertise and staff to be able to develop our own equipment to be able to monitor the PAA part per million and data log that information so that it's easily available and also reduces the labor costs and the focus that we have to put on an employee to be there checking that once an hour, reminding them once an hour. The equipment is automated, so it helps increase efficiencies in the packing house, in the packing process, but it's also extremely valuable from a data collection standpoint. It collects all the data, it sends it to a cloud base, or you can have it download to a jump drive, and it's there available when you have your audits or third-party audits, or for if customers want to see what your practices are and how you've been treating your product. Next slide. Same concept, except the MDS system is for recirculated water. So this would be for any of your hydro coolers, flume tanks. If you are doing IQF processing or any processing in general, the water that's being used right prior to freezing or the washing process, the process water itself, this is where the MDS would be used. It would have a probe. There's a probe that sits in that little collection plastic clear blue thing there at the bottom of the stainless steel cabinet. The process water passes through there. It reads what the ppm range is for the product you're using. So let's say Sanidate 12, and then sends it back into the flume. Meanwhile, it's data logging and logging those applications and the target ppm value so that you can access those any given time. And you can also make adjustments. So you can check to see if you have a load of dirty, let's say fruit coming in or tomatoes, you can make an adjustment and increase the ppm value if you feel there's a need to in real time from your phone, computer, or directly on the control panel. And just I know we're running short on time here, but for those guys that are growing berries, if you're, like I mentioned, it started off, a lot of us are dry packing our berries. So one of the best ways to help increase the shelf life is that pre-harvest spray that Sarah was talking about. That is by far the most effective method for not only extending shelf life and reducing yeast and molds on the surface of that fruit, but it is also going to eradicate any bacteria it comes in contact with. And that includes coliforms. So, well, it's not labeled as for human health pathogens. It doesn't matter whether it's a coliform, whether it's 0157 on the surface of that fruit, or whether it's Pseudomonas. When you spray oxidate on the surface of that fruit, it's going to eradicate it. And that includes your good and bad, your beneficials and your harmful pathogens. So just be cognizant of that. But for those that are dry packing, that pre-harvest spray is going to be your most effective option for extending shelf life. Thank you very much.